First of all, comrades, I'm really sorry I can't be there in person with you in Amsterdam, and I hope you have a good time and a nice congress. Um, so, the topic I will talk about and the title of this meeting stems from an article I wrote approximately a year ago in June 2024 that had the same name, Strategies for Liberation, Old and New Arguments in the Palestinian Left. I think many of the information I gave and on the arguments I made in this article are more relevant today than they were back then, if you can say so, because the strategy right now of the Palestinian movement and resistance in Gaza and the solidarity movement beyond is at a point where we have to ask serious strategic questions, I think. Um, so we have a devastating situation in Gaza with a full-on blockade that is causing mass hunger. And we also have still militant resistance in the Gaza Strip with Hamas and other factions still fighting, but more and more decoupled from the reality of the masses because yeah, of the severity of the situation and the Israeli occupying army focusing on destroying civil infrastructure rather than engaging into a military struggle against the tunnels and the resistance on the ground. So this is the issue. On the other hand, the so-called axis of resistance, with its prominent or most powerful state actor, Iran, has suffered devastating blows since I published the article, and its military strategy was defeated in many ways, with actors like Hezbollah and others single-handedly facing the Israeli occupying forces one after the other, and with the Assad regime crushing down, etc. So a lot of things have happened that I would say underline much of the thesis of the article, so it's still relevant for today. I'm talking about strategies of the Palestinian left, but already then also wanted to make clear that also recently other factions like Hamas are engaged in similar military strategy. And in the article, I argued that the reason for the decline of the historic organizations of the Palestinian left lie primarily in their prioritization of military strategies, which also made them dependent on the structures of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, as well as different regional regime and state actors. Exactly, and so this as an introduction, first of all, because I think we have to engage in serious discussions on strategy in order to liberate Palestine. I think for revolutionary socialists, first of all, to make that very clear, Palestinians have always had and continue to have every right to resist by any means necessary the imperialist-backed Zionist settler colony that occupies their land and oppresses them. And they should have our unconditional support when they fight for freedom. However, this doesn't mean it's uncritical support and solidarity, but that we have to engage in strategical discussions on how liberation can be vitalized, can be realized in the end. And I think revisiting the history and also controversial debates within the Palestinian left can provide a resource that helps us to understand the lessons of the past and develop also a strategy for today. So First of all, on the origins of the Palestinian left. So the Palestinian left basically grew out of a strand of Arab nationalism. So I would say Arab nationalism um, evolves and developed in a different context than, for example, Dutch nationalism or German nationalism, as an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist counter tendency. This we have to keep in mind. I think we have to differentiate as Marxists between different kinds of nationalism. And this swapped across the region mainly with the anti-colonial liberation of some of the countries after decades and more of colonization by France, by the British colonial regime, and so on. Um, so the ideology of pan-Arabism or Arab nationalism saw Arabs as a single people that was divided by the Sykes-Picot Accords, for example, where the British and the French divided the region in very strict lines, sometimes where beneath, in between ethnicities and so on, were divided in different countries, and where colonial divide and rule strategy also brought problems and division and so on. So this is the ideological background, and you also saw some of the leaders like Jamal Abdel Nasser that emerged as a champion of this Arab nationalism, and was seen as a leader back then, especially with the Suez crisis, where the very important Suez Canal in 1956 brought them into conflict with the imperialist powers, Britain and France. So these developments fed into these ideas, and the liberation of Palestine was seen as one aspect and a central cause, though, within this outlook for independence, self-determination of Arabs that were exposed to imperialist oppression. And of course, imperialism in the role played a huge role and still plays a huge role. Why is that so? Because this region is among the gas and oil richest of the world, and geopolitical as well as economically for capitalism, very important region. And Israel, the Zionist state that is very much connected to Western imperialist powers, is seen as a watchdog for these economic and geopolitical interests in this region. So this colonial movement is connected also to Western imperialist interests. That's, I think, important to understand as a structure, and why Arab nationalism unfolded the way it did. It had a huge throwback and defeat during the Six-Day War in 1967, when Egypt's army was crushed. The Syrian army was fought back, and the military failure also of Jordan called into question this doctrine that Arab unity would liberate Palestine. And by the way, what I said in the beginning on the question of the axis of resistance was also a problem back then, that there was national armies who didn't really coordinate in a way that would secure military success, but were defeated one by one, basically, one after the other. And that's the problem with national bourgeois armies trying to fight a military superpower like Israel that is supported unconditionally by the biggest world powers. So at this point, there were new strategic discussions, and left nationalist ideologies that branded themselves as Marxist started to compete with Nasserism in the so-called Arab nationalist movement back then in Palestine. So, and beyond, because much of it also developed in the diaspora, of course, because Palestinians were ethnically cleansed in 1947 and 48 during the Nakba, the catastrophe that had many Palestinians expelled for the newly created state of Israel in 1948. So their understanding of Marxism or left-wing nationalism was basically everything that was available on the market back then, and it was mostly influenced by Maoism, by Guevarism, as many other anti-colonial national liberation movements of the time, also inspired by the struggles of Algeria and Vietnam. So this was during also the '68 movement and its aftermath. So their strategies and also the texts of figures like Ho Chi Minh or Mao Zedong or Che Guevara were widely read and discussed in this context. And I want to point out some of the problems of this tradition. So first of all, there was a stagist theory in Stalinism and Maoism as a form of Stalinism that thought you would have to have bourgeois nationalist self-determination and a new nationalist capitalist state before you could have social questions. So this meant that the strategy for national liberation movement and the left wing within this national struggle against imperialism would be to subordinate and obey the bourgeois leadership. And this is a huge problem in the Palestinian context, as we will later see, because Fatah, the party Yasser Arafat is mostly known for it. Fatah became the party of the Palestinian national bourgeoisie and aimed for a state that was integrated into the world system and could coordinate and cooperate with other capitalist states, and to subordinate your own leftist, revolutionary, or socialist perspective. Under this is a recipe for defeat in this context because you will not even complete the first stage of a national liberation before you can do the second of socialist revolution. So yeah, among the leading figures of these leftist thinkers that saw themselves in this tradition were Dr. George Habash, for example, or Wadi Haddad, or later Ghassan Kanafani, maybe some of you know Leila Khaled. So very prominent figures, because the left back then was also very popular, very well connected also globally with other communist forces and left-wing forces and so on that were also in general on the uprise due to the class struggles and mass student movements and so on of 1968 and the movement which was like the last big movement that really severely challenged capitalism, I would say, and revolutionary uprisings around the world. So this was the climate in which it grew, and so the ANM I talked about, the Arab Nationalist Movement, and that developed into the PFLP, the Palestine that was part of the Palestine Liberation Front and merging with Fedayeen groups, so militant organizations of struggles developed in that context. I think that's important. Another problem, I mentioned the problem of the stagist theory. Another problem of Maoism or other forms of Stalinism is it's the very bureaucratic centralism within the organization, where you don't have democratic discussion and a very hierarchical party discipline that is not uh, developed in the sense that Lenin's democratic centralism was actually working back in the time. So these kinds of organizations have problems learning from mistakes or the struggle of the masses and being influenced by new developments and tend to have a bureaucratic leadership at a certain point. And this was also true for much of the PLO. Also, corruption played more and more a role, especially after the defeats in Jordan and in Lebanon of the PLO in the 70s and 80s. Mm. And the price for the Palestinian left had to pay for its dependency on these PLO structures under the leadership of Fatah were severe. Um, they tried to counteract it with more and more spectacular tactics of asymmetric warfare against its very powerful Israeli foe. Um, but they risked not really being in contact of the struggle of the masses and not seeing the broader picture of the working class within the entire region. So the importance and relevance of internationalism and a revolutionary strategy for the entire region. I think that's a central part of why it faced its decline later. Um, that, for example, in Jordan, there was, before the Black September, when the Palestinian factions got crushed by the Jordan monarchy and driven out of Jordan, there was a chance for a revolutionary perspective that would overthrow the dictatorship in Jordan together with Palestinians and Jordanians. So to understand the Palestinian liberation struggle as a struggle that is anchored within the desires and the interests of working class people within the entire region. Because, as I mentioned, the structure of imperialism and the aim of Israel as a watchdog is oppressing this entire region. It's most concrete, of course, in Palestine, where genocide and ethnic cleansing takes place, but it's more than that. It also affects all these regimes. And the Arab regimes we see today, like, for example, the military dictatorship in Egypt, as a very important and prominent example, they are collaborating with imperialism and Zionism quite openly, actually. They are trying to still say they are in solidarity with the Palestinians and so on, but it becomes more and more ridiculous, I would say, in the eyes of the world, because Egypt is the military dictatorship in Egypt is collaborating with the blockade against Gaza, and the interests of the masses are against their dictatorships that oppress them and where they are being exploited. And their dictatorships, on the other hand, are connected to imperialism and Zionism. And within uprisings, I think there's a lot of understanding on that. I want to point to a recent example that shows this well, I think. And this was in Morocco when the harbor got blocked by dock workers. Also followed by this was I think 3 weeks ago or something like that. Followed by also mass political protests. So the harbors blocked the dock. The dock workers blocked the harbor because they understood due to research of Palestine Solidarity Group that parts of F-35 fighting jets, as far as I'm informed, were also crossing this harbor and being redirected from there. So they didn't want to have anything to do with the genocide in Gaza and wanted to stop and hurt the Israeli war machine and blocked it, which was a very important sign. And within the protest that was faced by the state repression and the regime in Morocco, the people started to shout also political slogans that the Abraham Accords have to end. So these normalization accords between the Moroccan regime and Israel. And they got into conflict with the state forces and therefore also with a regime that was very popular a long time in Morocco, actually, with the people. But there you can see the connection and the dialectical the dialectical connection between the interests of the Arab masses against their regimes, against imperialism, and for free Palestine. So the liberation is connected. It's about freedom for all in the region, and you can't have one separated from the other. The problem is if you focus as Palestinians that are really compared to a superpower that is nourished by world imperialism, that has nuclear bombs and so on, as a very much disadvantaged military guerrilla group, if you rely on a military strategy and focus on this, you will be dependent on one or the other Arab regime that is embedded in this imperialist architecture. So you come into a very contradictory situation with this. And this has been shown very clearly, I think, by the history of the Palestinian left. And I think it still plays a role today when Hamas had the idea and the perspective that Arab regimes might change their politics towards Hamas, but then secret documents arrived very early from the Gulf states, from Jordan and so on, in contact with US imperialism, demanding Israel has to crush and destroy Hamas no matter the costs in Gaza. So they were complicit in the genocide and it didn't change one bit for these regimes, and they didn't support Hamas diplomatically or militarily or anything. So I think it was an illusion to aim towards this, and this really is a similar strategy to what the Palestinian left historically did with armed resistance as a substitute for a project of mass participation in the process of national as well as revolutionary emancipation in the whole region. So I think a glimpse of what would be needed could be seen in the so-called Arab Spring, in a set of revolutionary uprisings from below that connected social and political issues. But what was missing was a revolutionary socialist leadership and a mass party that could focus these ambitions and could lead them to victory, actually. And also there, within this process of revolutionary uprisings, you could see the connection. For example, in Egypt, the revolution of 2011 can be traced back to the solidarity with the Second Intifada in the beginning of the 2000 years, when Egyptian students mostly at the university were in solidarity with the Palestinians, and in the process also shouted slogans against Mubarak, first of all. And you often have this development, like I explained with Morocco as well. So you can't have one or the other. It has to be connected. And if you make yourself dependent on regimes that have to be overcome as Palestinian resistance, you can't have both of it because you will try to defend the regime. And for example, in Syria under Assad and so on, this was a huge problem, I would say. And Assad basically did nothing during the genocide, but that Syria stayed open for deliveries between Iran and mostly Lebanon. So this there was not much more to it within a military strategy. And I think what we need is a revolutionary strategy that involves the masses and not only elitist single groups. Not to say that the main problem with the situation today is, of course, the Oslo Accords and the development from the rifle to the olive branch, so to say, as a metaphor. Because Fatah in the beginning also had this military strategy, but sooner or later collaborated with imperialism. And because the Palestinian left didn't emancipate from its bourgeois leadership under Fatah, it couldn't develop a unified strategy that could go beyond that. And the Oslo Accords have been devastating for the Palestinian liberation movement, fragmentation, a fruitless so-called peace process, and with the Palestinian Authority today in the West Bank directly collaborating with the Israeli occupation. In Jenin, for example, it's Palestinian Authority forces that are cracking down on the militant resistance by the Palestinians in the camps. So this is the level of collaboration we are seeing in the process of Oslo. So this is not an alternative either to have peace talks with Israel or imperialism. I want to make that very clear. Only because I criticized the military strategy of the Palestinian left forces so much now. So yeah, I think we can have a discussion on that later. I want to make one last point. Because it still plays a role also, I think, in the diaspora, also probably in the Netherlands and somewhere else. There are certain echoes of this strategy on a small scale. For example, in the student movement, we had a lot of discussions on the question of escalation, to escalate, but to stay in very small circles that try to secure themselves against observation and so on, against betrayal, and that we have to become smaller, and better trained and so on. And I think this is a wrong strategy as well. We have to reach out. We have to break out of isolation. We have to connect our struggles to others. We have to be openly available, and mass support and mass activity is our best strategy against police brutality, state repression, and so on. That's the last point I also want to open for discussion because it's more concrete for us. Because also in Germany, as well as in the Netherlands and in other of these states, you will need the power of the working class within these countries to end the imperialist support of Israel. For example, in Germany delivers 30% of all of the weapons to Israel, so only second to the US. And if we want to stop that, we have to be connected to the force that actually can stop it. During the Corona pandemic, the leaders, media, and so on also openly said who really holds power in society when they say there's a critical sector. That's how they called it in Germany. I don't know how they did it in the Netherlands, but a system relevant sector, they called it, that has to keep going, to keep the system going. And they meant the working class. So the people who go to work every day, who keep the system going, and they can also block it with strikes. For example, as I told, with the dock workers going into blockade actions and so on, they can block the weapons. They can stop in the root the weapons from being developed in the first time. A conscious working class movement. And I think the most important part and role we can play in countries like the Netherlands or Germany is to have a revolutionary strategy here that has a revolutionary perspective against our own ruling class and fundamentally changes the way we relate internationally by aiming for overthrowing them. And I think we can only do that with the revolutionary subject of the working class. So I will end it here. This is my argument for strategic aim that can actually liberate Palestine and liberate humanity in general beyond Palestine. But the struggle for Palestine as the heart of anti-imperialism of the world today will play a vital and central role in liberating humanity, I would say. Thank you.